Chapter 7. The Parts of Man. The individual man is divisible into three parts. The first of these is the spirit, called in Scientology the Thetan. The second of these parts is the mind. The third of these parts is the body. Probably the greatest discovery of Scientology, and its most forceful contribution to the knowledge of mankind, has been the isolation, description, and handling of the human spirit. Accomplished in July 1952 in Phoenix, Arizona, I established along scientific lines, rather than mere belief, that thing which is the person, the personality, is separable from the body and the mind at will, and without causing bodily death or mental derangement. In ages past, there has been considerable controversy concerning the human spirit or soul, and various attempts to control man have been effective in view of his almost complete ignorance of his own identity. Latterly, spiritualists isolated from the person what they called the astral body, and with this they were able to work for various purposes of their own. In Scientology, the spirit itself was separated from what the spiritualists called the astral body, and there should be no confusion between these two things. As you know that you are where you are at this moment, so you would know if you, a spirit, were detached from your mind and body. Man has not discovered this before because, lacking the technologies of Scientology, he had very little reality upon his detachment from his mind and body. Therefore, he conceived himself to be, at least in part, a mind and a body. The entire cult of communism is based upon the fact that one lives only one life, that there is no hereafter, and that the individual has no religious significance. Man, at large, has been close to this state for at least the last century. The state, condition, is of a very low order, excluding, as it does, all self-recognition. The spirit. The Thetan, spirit, is described in Scientology as having no mass, no wavelength, no energy, and no time or location in space, except by consideration or postulate. The spirit, then, is not a thing. It is the creator of things. The usual residence of the Thetan is in the skull or near the body. A Thetan can be in one of four conditions. 1. The first would be entirely separate from a body or bodies, or even from this universe. 2. The second would be near a body and knowingly controlling the body. 3. The third would be in the body, the skull. 4. And the fourth would be an inverted condition whereby he is compulsively away from the body and cannot approach it. There are degrees, subdivisions, of each one of these four states. The most optimum of these conditions, from the standpoint of man, is the second. A Thetan is subject to deterioration. This is at first difficult to understand, since the entirety of his activity consists of considering or postulating. He uses, through his postulates, various methods of controlling a body. That he does deteriorate is manifest, but that he can at any moment return to an entirety of his ability is also factual. In that he associates beingness with mass and action, he does not consider himself as having an individual identity or name unless he is connected with one or more of the games of life. The processes of Scientology can establish this for the individual with greater or lesser rapidity, and one of the many goals of processing in Scientology is to exteriorize the individual and place him in the second condition above, near a body and knowingly controlling the body, since it has been discovered that he is happier and more capable when so situated. The mind. The mind is a communication and control system between the Thetan and his environment. A Thetan establishes various systems of control so that he can continue to operate a body and, through the body, operate things in the physical universe as well as other bodies. The most obvious portion of the mind is recognizable by anyone not in serious condition. This is the mental image picture. In Scientology, we call this mental image picture a facsimile when it is a photograph of the physical universe sometime in the past. We call this mental image picture a mock-up when it is created by the thetan or for the thetan and does not consist of a photograph of the physical universe. We call a mental image picture a hallucination, or more properly, an automaticity, something uncontrolled, when it is created by another and seen by self. Various phenomena connect themselves with this entity called the mind. Some people, closing their eyes, see only blackness. Some people see pictures. Some people see pictures made by body reactions. Some people see only black screens. Others see golden lines. Others see spaces. But the keynote of the entirety of the system called the mind is postulate and perception. Easily 10,000 new, separate mental phenomena, not hitherto seen by earlier observers, have been classified in Scientology and Dianetics, that branch of Scientology which applies only to the mind. The thetan receives, by the communication system called the mind, various impressions including direct views of the physical universe. In addition to this, he receives impressions from past activities and, most important, he himself being close to a total knowingness, conceives things about the past and future which are independent of immediately present stimuli. The mind is not, in its entirety, a stimulus-response mechanism, as old Marxist psychology, as once taught in universities, would have one believe. The mind has three main divisions. The first of these could be called the analytical mind, the second, the reactive mind, and the third, the somatic mind. The analytical mind. The analytical mind combines perceptions of the immediate environment, of the past via pictures, and estimations of the future into conclusions which are based upon the realities of situations. The analytical mind combines the potential knowingness of the thetan with the conditions of his surroundings and brings him to independent conclusions. This mind could be said to consist of visual pictures, either of the past or the physical universe, monitored by and presided over by the knowingness of a thetan. The keynote of the analytical mind is awareness. One knows what one is concluding and knows what he is doing. The reactive mind. The reactive mind is a stimulus-response mechanism. Ruggedly built and operable in trying circumstances, the reactive mind never stops operating. Pictures of a very low order are taken by this mind of the environment, even in some states of unconsciousness. The reactive mind acts below the level of consciousness. It is the literal stimulus-response mind. Given a certain stimulus, it gives a certain response. The entire subject of Dianetics concerned itself mainly with this one mind. While it is an order of thinkingness, the ability of the reactive mind to conclude rationally is so poor that we find in the reactive mind those various aberrated impulses which are gazed upon as oddities of personality, eccentricities, neuroses, and psychoses. It is this mind which stores up all the bad things that have happened to one and throws them back to him again, in moments of emergency or danger, so as to dictate his actions along lines which have been considered safe before. As there is little thinkingness involved in this, the courses of action dictated by the reactive mind are often not safe, but highly dangerous. The reactive mind is entirely literal in its interpretation of words and actions. As it takes pictures and receives impressions during moments of unconsciousness, a phrase uttered when a blow is struck is likely to be literally interpreted by the reactive mind and become active upon the body and analytical mind at later times. The mildest stage of this would be arduous training, wherein a pattern is laid into the mind for later use under certain given stimuli. A harsher and less workable level is the hypnotic trance condition to which the mind is susceptible. Made impressionable by fixed attention, words can be immediately implanted into the reactive mind, which become operable under re-stimulation at later times. An even lower level in the reactive mind is that one associated with blows, drugs, illness, pain, and other conditions of unconsciousness. Phrases spoken over an anesthetized person can have a later effect upon that person. It is not necessarily true that each and every portion of an operation is painstakingly photographed by the reactive mind of the unconscious patient. But it is true that a great many of these stimuli are registered. Complete silence in the vicinity of a person under anesthetic or a person who is unconscious or in deep pain is mandatory if one would preserve the mental health of that person or patient afterwards. Probably the most therapeutic action which could occur to an individual would be, under Scientology processing, the separation of the thetan from the mind, so that the thetan, under no duress and with total knowingness, could view himself and his mind and act accordingly. However, there is a type of exteriorization which is the most aberrative of all traumatic, mentally injurious actions. This is the condition when an individual is brought through injury or surgery or shock very close to death so that he exteriorizes from body and mind. This exteriorization under duress is sudden and, to the patient, inexplicable and is in itself very shocking. When this has occurred to an individual, it is certain that he will suffer mentally from the experience afterwards. It could be said that when the reactive mind contains these sudden shocks of exteriorization under duress, attempts to exteriorize the individual later by Scientology are more difficult. However, modern processing has overcome this. The phenomenon of exteriorization under duress is accompanied at times by energy explosions in the various facsimiles of the mind, and these cross-associate in the reactive mind. Therefore, people become afraid of exteriorization and at times are made ill simply by discussing the phenomenon due to the fact that they have exteriorized under duress during some operation or accident. Exteriorization under duress is the characteristic of death itself. Therefore, exteriorization, or the departure of the soul, is generally associated with death in the minds of most people. It is not necessarily true that one is dead because he exteriorizes, and it is definitely not true that exteriorization not accompanied by a shock, pain, or duress is at all painful. Indeed, it is quite therapeutic. The somatic mind. The third portion of the mind is the somatic mind. This is an even heavier type of mind than the reactive mind, since it contains no thinkingness and contains only actingness. The impulses placed against the body by the thetan through various mental machinery arrive at the voluntary, involuntary, and glandular levels. These have set methods of analysis for any given situation and so respond directly to commands given. Unfortunately, the somatic mind is subject to each of the minds higher in scale above it and to the thetan. In other words, the thetan can independently affect the somatic mind. The analytical mind can affect the somatic mind. The reactive mind can affect the somatic mind. Thus we see that the neurons, the glandular system, the muscles and masses of the body are subject to various impulses, each one of a lower order than the next. Thus it is not odd to discover what we call psychosomatic illness. A condition exists here where the thetan does not have an awareness of burdening the somatic mind with various commands or derangements. Neither does the thetan have an awareness of his own participation in the analytical mind causing this action against the body. In that the thetan is seldom aware of the reactive mind, it is possible then for the reactive mind, with its stimulus-response content, to impinge itself directly and without further recourse or advice upon the neurons, muscles, and glandular system of the body. In that the reactive mind can hold a fixed command in place, causing a derangement in the somatic mind, it is possible then for illness to exist, for bizarre pains to be felt, for actual physical twists and aberrations to occur without any conscious knowledge on the part of the thetan. This we call physical illness caused by the mind. In brief, such illness is caused by perceptions received in the reactive mind during moments of pain and unconsciousness. Whether the facsimile in the mind is received while the thetan is awake or unconscious, the resulting mass of the energy picture is energy, just as you see energy in an electric light bulb or from the flames of a fire. At one time it was considered that mental energy was different from physical energy. In Scientology, it has been discovered that mental energy is simply a finer, higher-level physical energy. The test of this is conclusive in that a thetan mocking up creating mental image pictures and thrusting them into the body can increase the body mass, and by casting them away again can decrease the body mass. This test has actually been made, and an increase of as much as 30 pounds, actually measured on scales, has been added to and subtracted from a body by creating mental energy. Energy is energy. It has different wavelengths and different characteristics. The mental image pictures are capable of reacting upon the physical environment, and the physical environment is capable of reacting upon mental image pictures. Thus, the mind actually consists of spaces, energies, and masses of the same order as the physical universe, if lighter and different in size and wavelength. For a much more comprehensive picture of the mind, one should read Dianetics, the original thesis, and Dianetics, the modern science of mental health. These were written before the discovery of the upper levels of beingness were made, and are a very complete picture of the mind itself, its structure, and what can be done to it and with it. The body. The third part of man is the physical body. This can best be studied in such books as Gray's Anatomy and other anatomical texts. This is the province of the medical doctor and usually the old-time psychiatrist or psychologist who were involved in the main in body worship. The body is a purely structural study, and the actions and reactions amongst its various structures are complex and intensely interesting. When Scientology established biophysics, it did so because of the various discoveries which it accumulated concerning mental energy in its reaction against physical energy and the activities which took place in the body because of these interactions. Biophysics only became feasible when it was discovered in Scientology that a fixed electrical field existed surrounding a body, entirely independent of but influenceable by the human mind. The body exists in its own space. That space is created by anchor points, points which are anchored in a space different to the physical universe space around a body. The complexity of these anchor points can cause an independent series of electronic flows which can occasion much discomfort to the individual. The balanced structure of the body and even its joint action and physical characteristics can be changed by changing this electrical field which exists at a distance from or within the body. The electrical field is paramount and monitors the actual physical structure of the body. Thus, the body is not only influenced by the three minds, it is influenced as well by its own electrical field. An expert Scientologist can discover this field for the average person and can bring about its adjustment, although this is very far from the primary purpose of the Scientologist. The use of electrical shocks upon a body for any purpose is therefore very dangerous and is not condoned by sensible men. Of course, the use of electrical shock was never intended to be therapeutic, but was intended only to bring about obedience by duress and, as far as it can be discovered, to make the entirety of insanity a horror. Electrical shock deranges the electronic field in the vicinity of the body and is always succeeded by bad health or physical difficulties, and never does otherwise than hasten the death of the person. It has been stated by people using electric shock that if they were denied euthanasia, the right to kill people who were considered to be a burden on a society, they would at least use partial euthanasia in the form of electric shock, brain surgery, and drugs. These quote-unquote treatments, in some large percentage of cases, however, effected euthanasia, as they were expected to do. A knowledge of the mental and physical structure of the body would be necessary in order to treat the body, and this knowledge has not existed prior to Scientology. The medical doctor achieved many results by working purely with structure and biochemical products, and in the field of emergency surgery and obstetrics and orthopedics, he is indispensable in the society. Medicine, however, did not even contain a definition for mind, and is not expected to invade the field which belongs, properly, to Scientology. These three parts of man, the thetan, the mind, and the body, are each one different studies, but they influence each other markedly and continually. Of the three, the senior entity is the thetan, For without the Thetan, there would be no mind or animation in the body. While without a body or a mind, there is still animation and life in the Thetan. The Thetan is the person. You are you in a body. Para-Scientology. Many speculations have been made in the field of para-Scientology. Para-Scientology includes all of the uncertainties and unknown territories of life which have not been completely explored and explained. However, as studies have gone forward, it has become more and more apparent that the senior activity of life is that of the Thetan, and that in the absence of the spirit, no further life exists. In the insect kingdom, it is not established whether or not each insect is ordered by a spirit, or whether one spirit orders enormous numbers of insects. It is not established how mutation and evolution occur, if they do. And the general authorship of the physical universe is only speculated upon, since Scientology does not invade the eighth dynamic. See Chapter 4, The Eight Dynamics. Some facts, however, are completely known. 1. The first of these is that the individual himself is a spirit controlling a body via a mind. 2. The second of these is that the Thetan is capable of making space, energy, mass, and time. 3. The third of these is that the Thetan is separable from the body without the phenomenon of death and can handle and control a body from well outside it. 4. The fourth of these is that the Thetan does not care to remember the life which he has just lived after he has parted from the body and the mind. 5. The fifth of these is that a person dying always exteriorizes. 6. The sixth of these is that the person, having exteriorized, usually returns to a planet and procures, usually, another body of the same type of race as before. In Para-Scientology, there is much discussion about between lives areas and other phenomena which might have passed at one time or another for heaven or hell. But it is established completely that a Thetan is immortal, and that he himself cannot actually experience death and counterfeits it by forgetting. It is adequately manifest that a Thetan lives again, and that he is very anxious to put something on the time track, something for the future, in order to have something to come back to. Thus we have the anxieties of sex. There must be additional bodies for the next life. It is obvious that what we create in our societies during this lifetime affects us during our next lifetime. This is quite different than the belief or the idea that this occurs. In Scientology, we have very little to do with forcing people to make conclusions. An individual can experience these things for himself, and unless he can do so, no one expects him to accept them. The manifestation that our hereafter is our next life entirely alters the general concept of spiritual destiny. There is no argument whatever with the tenets of any faith, since it is not precisely stated uniformly by all religions that one immediately goes to a heaven or hell. It is certain that an individual experiences the effect of the civilization, which he has had part in creating, in his next lifetime. In other words, the individual comes back. He has a responsibility for what goes on today, since he will experience it tomorrow. Sex has been overweighted in importance in old psychotherapy, an importance more or less disgraced at this time. Sex is only one of numerous creative impulses. An anxiety about sex, however, occurs when an individual begins to believe that there will not be a body for him to have during the next lifetime. The common denominator of all aberration is cessation of creation. As sex is only one kind of creation, and a rather low order of it, it will be seen that unhappiness could stem from various cessations of creation. Death itself is a cessation of creation. One stops creating the identity John Jones and the environment and things of John Jones. He stops because he believes he cannot himself continue this creation without the assistance of a body. Having become dependent upon a mind and a body, the first to do his thinking for him and the second to do his acting, an individual becomes sufficiently morose on the ideas of creation that he can actually bring about the condition of an inability to create. Control it will be seen that the three parts of man are intimately associated with control. The anatomy of control is start, change, and stop. The loss of control takes place with the loss of pandeterminism. When one becomes too partisan, braces himself too solidly against the remainder of the environment, he no longer controls the environment to the degree that he might, and so is unable to start, change, and stop the environment. It is a scientific definition in Scientology that control consists of start, change, and stop. These three manifestations can be graphed alongside of the apparent cycle of action: create, survive, destroy. Any person is somewhere along this curve. An individual who is bent mainly upon survival is intent usually upon changing things. An individual who is close to being destroyed is bent mainly upon stopping things. An individual who has a free heart and mind about life is bent upon creating things. There could be three things wrong with any person, and these would be the inability to start, the inability to change, the inability to stop. Insanity, for the most part, is an inability to stop. A neurosis is a habit, which, worsening, flies entirely out of control. One is stopped so often in life that he becomes an enemy of stopping, and dislikes stopping so intensely that he himself will not stop things. Neurosis and psychosis of all classes are entirely inabilities to start, to change, or to stop. In the matter of the parts of man, we discover that all things are initiated by the Thetan so far as action, activity, and behavior are concerned. After such an initiation, he can be blunted or warped from course and acted upon in such a way that his attention becomes too fixed along one line or another, and he begins to suffer from these three inabilities. However, each one of the parts of man is subject to the anatomy of control. An individual begins first by being unable himself, and without help, to start, to change, and to stop. Then the mind may become prone to these disabilities and is unable to start, change, or stop at will. Then the body itself can become subject to these three disabilities and is unable to start, to change, and to stop. The oddity, however, is that an environment can so work upon an individual that a Thetan's body becomes disabled through no choice of his own. Similarly, the mind can become disabled through no choice of either the body or the Thetan. But the Thetan himself, beyond observing the effect of various causes and having initiated the thought to be there, can only become disabled by becoming too partisan, by becoming too little pan-determined, and so bringing himself into difficulties. These difficulties, however, are entirely the difficulties of consideration. As the Thetan considers, so he is. In the final analysis, the Thetan has no problems of his own. The problems are always other people's problems, and must exist in the mind or the body or in other people or his surroundings for him to have problems. Thus, his difficulties are, in the main, the difficulties of staying in the game and keeping the game going. If a Thetan can suffer from anything, it is being out-created, created against too thoroughly. The manifestations of being out-created would be the destruction of his own creations and the overpowering presence of other creations. Thus, a Thetan can be brought to believe that he is trapped if he is out-created. In past dissertations on the subject of the mind and philosophies of life, there was a great deal of speculation and very little actual proof. Therefore, these philosophies were creations, and one philosopher was at work out-creating another philosopher. In Scientology, we have this single difference. We are dealing with discoveries. The only things created about Scientology are the actual books and works in which Scientology is presented. The phenomena of Scientology are discovered and are held in common by all men and all life forms. There is no effort in Scientology to out-create each and every Thetan that comes along. It is, of course, possible to conceive Scientology as a creation and to conceive that it is overwhelming. It should be viewed otherwise. For it is intended as an assistance to life at large, to enable life to make a better civilization and a better game. Chapter 8. Causation and Knowledge. Scientology is composed of many axioms, self-evident truths. There are some 58 of these axioms, in addition to the 200 more axioms of Dianetics which preceded the Scientology axioms. The first 10 axioms of Scientology are: Axiom 1. Life is basically a static. Definition: a life static has no mass, no motion, no wavelength, no location in space or in time. It has the ability to postulate and perceive. Definition: in Scientology, the word postulate means to cause a thinkingness or consideration. It is a specially applied word and is defined as causative thinkingness. Axiom 2. The static is capable of considerations, postulates, and opinions. Axiom 3. Space, energy, objects, form, and time are the result of considerations made and or agreed upon or not by the static, and are perceived solely because the static considers that it can perceive them. Axiom 4. Space is a viewpoint of dimension. Space is caused by looking out from a point. The only actuality of space is the agreed-upon consideration that one perceives through something, and this we call space. Axiom 5. Energy consists of postulated particles in space. One considers that energy exists and that he can perceive energy. One also considers that energy behaves according to certain agreed-upon laws. These assumptions or considerations are the totality of energy. Axiom 6. Objects consist of grouped particles and also of solid masses. Axiom 7. Time is basically a postulate that space and particles will persist. The rate of their persistence is what we measure with clocks and the motion of heavenly bodies. Axiom 8. The apparency of time is the change of position of particles in space. Axiom 9. Change is the primary manifestation of time. Axiom 10. The highest purpose in this universe is the creation of an effect. These first 10 axioms of Scientology are the most fundamental truths, by which we mean commonly held considerations. Here we have thought and life and the physical universe in their relation one to the other. Regardless of further considerations, ideas, assumptions, and conditions, there lie beneath them these first 10 truths. It is as though one had entered into an honorable bargain with fellow beings to hold these things in common. Once this is done, or once such a contract or agreement exists, one has the fundamentals of a universe. Specialized considerations, based on the above axioms, make one or another kind of universe. The physical universe, which we see around us and in which we live, was created on these fundamentals without regard to who created it. Its creation was agreed upon. In order to perceive it, one must agree that it exists. There are 3 classes of universes. 1. There is first, foremost, and most evident the physical universe of spaces, stars, suns, land, sea, air, and living forms. 2. Then there is the other fellow's universe, which may or may not be agreed upon by his associates. This he holds to himself. The phenomenon of this universe is included in the field of the mind, as described earlier. 3. Then listed last here, but first perceived, is one's own universe. The phenomenon of universes is an interesting one, since one's own universe can be overwhelmed by the universes of others. These, in Scientology, we call valences, extra-personalities, selves, apparent beingnesses. Valences and universes are the same thing, essentially. For example, one, while living in the physical universe, can be overpowered by the universe of, let us say, Father. While one still retains his own valence or identity, one is yet acting or thinking or suffering or feeling somewhat like Father. Even though one is by oneself, there is this additional apparent beingness. Although Father is absent, his commands are still present. Thus we get such things as duty, obedience, training, and even education. Each one of these is caused by some part of another universe to a greater or lesser degree. Regardless of how one reacts to universes, he still remains, in some degree, himself. It is the effort of many to struggle against universes or valences. In fact, this is a game, and the essence of games. The totality of the impulse of aberrated people is the effort to separate one's own self as a thetan from the various universes with which he feels himself too intimately associated. One is only oppressed by a universe when he feels he can have nothing of that universe. One is only victimized by Father's universe when one is in protest against Father. One protests against the physical universe only when he feels that he can have no part of it or does not belong in it, or, as in religion, is not looked upon kindly by what he conceives to be the creator of the physical universe. There is a basic law about universes. The postulates of the creator of any universe are the postulates which work in that universe. Thus, one may feel uncomfortable in the universe of another. Universes, as considered in games earlier, could be considered the playing fields of life. One plays willingly or one plays unwillingly. When one begins to play unwillingly, he is apt to discover himself victimized by and interiorized into the universe of some game. It is against this phenomenon that a person protests. Consider the matter of a jail. On the surface of it, as Voltaire discovered, a jail provides food and shelter and leisure time. This would seem to be the ambition of many people. But the jail provides as well a restriction without one's consent. The only difference between being in jail and being the king in a castle, so far as liberty is concerned, is one's own desires in the matter and one's own ability to command his environment. As a king in a castle, one would be causative. His will, statement, thinkingness would have an effect upon others. Being in a jail, one is an effect in that the thinkingness of others finds him its target. Here we have, in terms of universes, the most rudimentary example of cause and effect. We must, however, assume, because it is so evident, that an individual only gets into traps and circumstances he intends to get into. Certain it is that having gotten into such a position he may be unwilling to remain in it, but a trap is always preceded by one's own choice of entrance. We must assume a very wide freedom of choice on the part of a thetan, since it is almost impossible to conceive how a thetan could get himself trapped even though he consented to it. By actual demonstration, a thetan goes through walls, barriers, vanishes space, appears anywhere at will, and does other remarkable things. It must be, then, that an individual can be trapped only when he considers that he is trapped. In view of the fact that the totality of existence is based upon his own considerations, we find that the limitations he has must have been invited to himself. Otherwise, they could not be eradicated by the individual under processing, since the only one that is present with the pre-clear is the auditor, and past associates of the pre-clear, while not present, do desensitize under processing in the pre-clear's mind. Therefore, it must have been the pre-clear who kept them there. The pre-clear, by processing, can resolve all of his difficulties without going and finding other persons or consulting other universes. Thus, the totality of entrapment, aberration, even injury, torture, insanity, and other distasteful items are basically considerations a thetan is making and holding right now, in present time. This must be the case, since time itself is a postulate or consideration on his own part. The greatest philosophical clamor or quarrel has been waged around the subject of knowledge, and there is nothing preposterous on the subject of knowledge that cannot be found in the philosophical texts. The superiority and ascendancy of Scientology depends upon the fact that it has transcended this philosophical quarrel on the subject of knowingness. Scientology contains in itself the basics of knowledge. By knowledge we mean assured belief, that which is known, information, instruction, enlightenment, learning, practical skill. By knowledge we mean data, factors, and whatever can be thought about or perceived. The reason why knowledge has been misunderstood in philosophy is that it is only half the answer. There is no allness to knowledge. By definition, knowledge is that which is perceived or learned or taken from another source. This patently means, then, that when one learns, he is being an effect. We see in Axiom 10 that the highest purpose in this universe is the creation of an effect. This is in direct contradiction to knowledge, although one, of course, can know how to create an effect. Opposed to knowledge, we have the neglected half of existence, which is the creation of knowledge, the creation of data, the creation of thought, the causative consideration, self-evolved ideas as opposed to ideas otherwise evolved. The reason Scientology is such a fascinating study is that it takes apart the other fellow's ideas and permits one to create some of his own. Scientology gives us the common denominators of objects, energies, spaces, universes, livingness, and thought itself. There is cause and effect. Cause could be defined as emanation. It could be defined also for purposes of communication as source point. If you consider a river flowing to the sea, the place where it began would be the source point, or cause, and the place where it went into the sea would be the effect point, and the sea would be the effect of the river. The man firing the gun is cause. The man receiving the bullet is effect. The one making a statement is causing the communication. The one receiving the statement is the effect of the communication. A basic definition of communication is cause-distance-effect. Almost all anxieties and upsets in human relations come about through an imbalance of cause and effect. One must be willing at once to cause new data, statements, assumptions, considerations, and to receive ideas, assumptions, considerations. So great is the anxiety of a thetan to cause an effect that he closely approaches those things which can cause an effect upon him. Thus, a thetan becomes trapped. On the face of it, so few thetans make causative data and so many receive data that it would seem, in view of the fact that a thetan can be touched only by his own consideration, that thetans are more anxious for effects than to be cause. However, this is not true in practice. In a game, one seeks to cause an effect and to receive no effect. It is learned, under close experiment, that there is nothing a thetan actually disdains on an effect level. He pretends not to like or enjoy certain effects and protests against them. But he knows very well that the mechanism of protest causes the effect to approach more closely as a general rule. This came about by his repeated failure in games. Insisting on no effect for himself, he lost. Then he had to say he liked the effect. The prevailing anxiety, then, is to be an effect, not to be a cause. The entire subject of responsibility is a study of cause and effect, in that a person who wants no responsibility is anxious to be an effect only, and a person who can assume responsibility must also be willing to be causative. A thetan can be swung into a state of consideration by observing that it is commonly held by others. This keeps him in the universe, and this keeps him being effect. Study, investigation, receiving education, and similar activity are all effect activities and result in the assumption of less responsibility. Thus, while it is true that a thetan cannot actually get into trouble, he can, by agreeing with the current agreed-upon thought in the universe where he finds himself, take a pattern of thinkingness which makes him less effective because he wishes to be an effect. If he feels he must gather all of his data from elsewhere, he is then the effect of knowledge, the effect of universes and postulates, and he tends to reduce his own ability to form or make knowledge. In Scientology, we can communicate in full these circumstances, since we are only calling to attention the pattern which an individual already himself holds. Thus, we are not actually teaching him anything. We are only pointing out things he has already agreed with or himself caused. It is only generally true that an individual is responsible for everything that happens to him. When an individual wishing to cause many interesting effects chooses to go into many universes or traps, he can become confused about what he is doing, where he is, or what it is all about. Scientology points out that this can be seen or changed from a person's own viewpoint to bring about a change in his own condition. As an example, a Thetan has come to believe that the right way to get along in life is to do just as Father did. This is an invitation to being in Father's universe. Later on, he changes his mind about this. But he finds himself still in Father's universe and doesn't like it. He would be more effective, more capable, if he were not now in Father's universe. Customarily, in these unenlightened times, he waits for death to separate himself from the environment in which he finds himself and puts up with it until then. It is not necessary to do this now that we have Scientology. He can at any moment, given the proper steerage, vacate any trap in which he finds himself and begin again on a new series of considerations. We cannot then talk about knowledge as a totality. It is a single datum. The thirst for knowledge would be the thirst for other Thetan's postulates, and would lead one to forget that he himself has been a party to the making of these postulates, and that he himself had to follow a certain course in order to put himself in reach of other Thetan's postulates. Because one is the effect of knowledge, the causing of data, considerations, or facts to come into existence separates one in distance from being an effect. If one is very anxious to be an effect, if this is his basic consideration, he will not take well to causing information to come into existence. But in order to get him out of the traps in which he finds himself, it is necessary to some degree that he does so. Causing few barriers or traps, the individual then loses control over barriers or traps. Wishing to be an effect, of course, he does lose control of barriers and traps. Otherwise, he cannot be entrapped by them. The thing to do to free him from a trap is to find what parts of the trap he himself is willing to create, own, have, or possess. This places the barriers, which can be spaces, energy movements, or obstacles, under his control, and his postulating that he can have or possess this or that causes him to be willing to be or occupy the trap. The moment this occurs, he is no longer in the trap, or even if he is still in it, to some degree he does not object to it and can leave it when he wishes. Civilization and savagery. The way to paralyze a nation entirely and to make it completely ungovernable would be to forbid education of any kind within its borders, and to inculcate into every person within it the feeling that they must not receive any information from anybody about anything. To make a nation governable, it is necessary to hold a kindly view of education and to honor educative persons and measures. To conquer a land, it is not necessarily efficient to overwhelm them with guns. Once this is done, it is necessary to apply educative measures in order to bring about some sort of agreement amongst the people themselves, as well as between the conqueror and the subdued. Only in this way could one have a society, a civilization, or, as we say in Scientology, a smoothly running game. In other words, two extremes could be reached, neither one of which is desirable by the individual. The first extreme could be reached by emphasis only upon self-created data or information. This would bring about not only a lack of interpersonal relations, but also an anxiety to have an effect which would, as it does in barbaric peoples, result in social cruelty unimaginable in a civilized nation. The other extreme would be to forbid in its entirety any self-created information and to condone only data or considerations generated by others than self. Here, we would create an individual with no responsibility, so easily handled that he would be only a puppet. Self-created data is, then, not a bad thing. Neither is education, but one without the other, to hold it in some balance, will bring about a no-game condition or a no-civilization. Just as individuals can be seen by observing nations, so we see the primitive tribesman with his complete contempt for truth and his emphasis on brutality and savagery for others, but not himself, is a no-civilization. And we see at the other extreme China, slavishly dedicated to ancient scholars, incapable of generating within herself sufficient rulers to continue, without bloodshed, a nation. We have noted the individual, who must be the only one who can make a postulate or command, whose authority is dearer to him than the comfort or state of millions that have suffered from such men. Napoleon, Hitler, Kaiser Wilhelm, Frederick of Prussia, Genghis Khan, Attila. We have known, too, the scholar who has studied himself into blindness and is the world's greatest authority on government, or some such thing, who yet cannot himself manage his bank account or a dog with any certainty. Here we have, in either case, a total imbalance. The world shaker is himself unwilling to be any effect of any kind, and all the men named here were arrant personal cowards. And we have the opposite, a man who would not know what you were talking about if you told him to get an idea of his own. We see another example of this in the fundamental laws of warfare. A body of troops, to be effective, must be able to attack and to defend. Its implements must be divided 50% for attack and 50% for defense. In other words, even in a crude activity such as warfare, we find that no successful outcome is possible unless the troops can devote half of their energies to attack and half of them to defense. In the much broader view of life, we discover on any dynamic that success or a game or activity or life itself depends upon being willing to be cause as well as willing to be an effect. He who would give must be willing to receive. He who would receive must be willing to give. When these tenets are violated, the most fundamental principle of human relationships is violated. And the result is a no-game condition such as aberration, insanity, antisocialness, criminality, inactivity, laziness, tiredness, mania, fanaticism, and all the other things against which men protest. But imbalances between cause and effect also enter randomities into the game of life, and cannot be neglected in their potential for creating a game. Any information is valuable to the degree that you can use it. In other words, any information is valuable to the degree that you can make it yours. Scientology does not teach you, it only reminds you. For the information was yours in the first place. It is not only the science of life, but it is an account of what you were doing before you forgot what you were doing. Chapter 9. Know and Not Know. It is a mechanism of thinkingness, whether one is postulating or receiving information, that one retains one's ability to know. It is equally important that one retains one's ability to not know. Thought consists entirely of knowing and not knowing, and the shades of gray between. You will discover that most people are trying not to remember. In other words, they are trying to not know. Education can only become burdensome when one is unable to not know it. It is necessary that one be able to create, to receive, to know, and to not know information, data, and thoughts. Lacking any one of these skills, for they are skills no matter how native they are to the individual, one is apt to get into a chaos of thinkingness, or creatingness, or livingness. You can look at any eccentric or aberrated person and discover rapidly, by an inspection of him, which one of these four factors he is violating. He either is unable to know or not know his own created thoughts, or he is unable to know or not know the thoughts of others. Somewhere, for some reason best known to him, in his anxiety to be part of the game, he has lost one of these abilities. Time is a process of knowing in the present and not knowing in the future or the past. Remembering is the process of knowing the past. Prediction is the process of knowing the future. Forgetting is the process of not knowing the past. And living only for today is the process of not knowing the future. Exercises in these various items rehabilitate not only the sanity or ability of the individual, but his general capability in living and playing the game. Chapter 10. The Goal of Scientology. The end object of Scientology is not the making into nothing of all of existence or the freeing of the individual of any and all traps everywhere. The goal of Scientology is making the individual capable of living a better life in his own estimation and with his fellows, and the playing of a better game.